Today, I am going to talk about the nature of learning disabilities. Aside from the desire to know why and how learning disabilities occur in an individual, one of the main goals of the research in this field for the last 60 years is to create a better, more efficient educational environment for the students who have these difficulties in order to help them navigate through the reality of contemporary life. Thanks to tons of research, we know today that learning disabilities are neurobiological in nature. However, this theory started gaining popularity only about 60 years ago. Before that, and there are still some who believe it today, the majority of people thought that students with learning disabilities are just lazy, were not taught well, or had lack of upbringing at home. And this was the reason of their academic and social difficulties. If you're not familiar with the research on neurobiological basis of learning disabilities, here are the main points that you need to know in order to understand where they come from. First of all, many learning disabilities are hereditary in nature and are genetically transmitted to the child. This is not to say that if you have dyslexia, for example, your child will definitely get it. However, one of your grand or even great-grandchildren might. Secondly, it is the looks of the brain and the size of neurons in the certain areas of it that are responsible for the difference in perception and difficulties in performing certain tasks in people with learning disabilities. For example, in a typical brain, the hemispheres are asymmetrical, but the brain of a person with dyslexia is either completely symmetrical or the asymmetry is not very prominent. Also, the neurons in the visual part of the brain are much smaller than in a typical brain, and it causes the neurons to choose a different than regular pathway when reading. So, why can this happen? One of the causes can be a brain injury, for example, due to an accident. However, a lot of the elements affect the developing brain in prenatal or perinatal during the birth stage. Some of the main causes are prolonged exposure of the pregnant woman or a baby to toxins such as lead, pesticides, or PCBs, which can affect thyroid hormones, which in their turn regulate the function of the neurons in some parts of the brain. Consumption of alcohol, smoking, and use of drugs, including marijuana and cocaine during the pregnancy, do not allow the brain to develop in a typical way, or can cause malfunctions in the brain development, which affects various areas of function later in life, such as auditory functions, reading, adaptability, and many more. Another potential cause can be malnutrition of either a pregnant woman or a baby or a child or both. The two main effects of malnutrition is iron and calcium deficiency, which affect development in a very negative way. So, what can be done with all this information? Can we cure a learning disability? Definitely not. But we can help make it better. If you remember, I mentioned the pathways that neurons in the brain take to perform a task before. These pathways are key to perform a task correctly. When completing an activity, the neurons in our brain take a specific path from one area to another or from one hemisphere to the other, and that what makes us correctly complete an activity. For example, recognize a letter and connect it to its name. As you remember, the pathways in the brain of a person with learning disability are not the same, which makes it difficult or more time-consuming to get to the expected result. Luckily for us, our brain is very plastic. What it means is that when using systematic, explicit instructions and intensively practicing building a specific skill, such as sound-phonic relationship, for example, the brain can learn to change the pathways it has and to create a new route, so to speak, that will allow a person with a learning disability to do an activity that they previously could not do. So, Having a basic understanding of how the brain of a person with learning disability is different from a typical brain, and finding and using specific strategies that can rewire the brain by making new pathways can make the life of people with learning disabilities, as well as their family members and teachers, much easier.